Yeah, and survey.
Survey, yeah. There's a QR code in their program, so they can scan, or there's paper surveys after them. And after your session, Rangiti, you will come up and do a karakia for the kai? Yeah, I'll let him know. I'll find him, yeah.
Hi.
Oh, kia ora, you feeling good?
Yeah.
Okay, these two, they won't be nervous. These two won't be nervous.
No.
Oh, you don't know. Like, I get really nervous every day.
Yeah. So this is
There is no exception. Are you ready to go?
Take it by?
You just come away from this for a sec. So we're just having trouble uploading that PowerPoint presentation. So once it's
Kia ora tātou. Could everybody please take their seats for the next session? Do you want to sit? No, you can sit here or there. You'll take that. This next session is taking te Reo Māori ki te ao. And our two panellists need no introduction in this setting. So please welcome Mercia Dawn Yates and Stacey Morrison.
Tēnā no tātou e te whare. Neira te mihi kau atu kia koutou, o tira koutou ki te kāinga, kua honohono mai I tēnei o ngā rangi, me mihi kā tika kia koutou. Just a couple of little housekeeping duties to get underway before I introduce our panellist for this morning. So McLeod's Booksellers will be selling, as you may well know, the Kupu writers' books during the Kai break, which will be followed directly after this morning's session. We've also got online viewers, so I did want to give a little bit of an acknowledgement to each and every one of you out there. As I was last night, it's the first one that I'd missed this week, cousin, but I watched it from the comfort of my home. So, kia ora, kia koutou. Our sponsors also for this amazing event, Kupu Festival 2022, Creative New Zealand, McLeod's Booksellers, One Foundation, Rotorua Trust, Te Arawhiti, Te Tatau o Te Arawa, Rotorua Reo Ngāti Whakaue Education Endowment Fund, as well as some sneaky things in there by Te Arawa FM. Also, on your Kupu handouts, there is something on there, like a piece you can scan, that you can either go to the online survey to complete your survey, or there are paper surveys as well. Heo anō e tiwi, without further ado, I must get on with talking to our manuhiri this morning. Anei te tehi o ngā hihiri, nau anō tēnei I tito. Ara, I kite a hau I te tehi o ngā whakāturanga. Stacey's just come hot off the heels of an amazing kaupapa in Tāmaki. And I saw this celebrated by one of my cousins who took a snapshot of Stacey, as well as this hihiri. E tūwhera ana tōku ngākau, kia ako, kia mau. E tūwhera ana o kutaringa, kia whakarongo, kia mau. E koi ana tōku arero, kia kōrero, kia mau. E tauana o ku whakaro, kia ako, kia mau. Ko te mana o te reo Māori tēnei, e whakamahu mai nei, kia tau Ka mau, nau mai tōku reo, nau mai e te whanaunga, nau mai hoki mai ki tō ukai pō. Ko Stacey Morrison tēnei, no Te Arawa, no Ngaitahu, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, o tira tēnā tātou. Oh, paki mai.
Paki mai.
Engari e noho whakaiti nei ahau, tēnei uri o tamate kapua. Nā te mea kua tau mai o ku waiwai ki tēnei whenua taurikura o tātou. Ka ki te au i aku rangatira, rangitihi, tēnei ka mihi ki a koe o ku kuia mai kore ake koutou. Mai kore ake koutou e whakapakari tonu i tō tātou reo, i tiaki i tō tātou reo kia whai wāhi tonu ai mātou ngā reo ngā e whai ake nei ki te kōrero i te reo o tēnei takiwā. Ko te tūmanako ia, he ki te ngā kanohi, he hoki ngā mahara ki tōku kuia. Ko Katerina Maniapoto i mōhiotia, ko Car Daniels, ko ia tōku kuia. Ko ia tētahi tipu ake i whakarewarewa no tūhaurangi ngō Ngāti Wāhi au hoki mātou. O tira tātou. Nō reira, he runga manawa, you come in on the plane and we came in over the lakes and I was like, oh, that's us. And if you haven't heard the gossip, we also part-time live in Maketu now as well. I rang up my uncle, I said, uncle, I better tell you, we stay in Maketu now as well. And he goes, oh, I've already heard. Nō reira, hakoa ko Morrison tōku ingoa. He ingoa nā taku mārena ki tētahi akene pēa mōhiotia nei e koutou. He was unable to come today because he has to watch our son play rugby. But I am both from here and from Ngaitahu as well. But it's a huge effort for you to all come, and this festival is so beautiful. Are you proud? I think everyone should feel so proud.
Yes,
and
was that a unanimous yes? We're very proud.
But it's just so beautiful to be in this space together, you know, the head space, the writing space, the creative space. And so that whakamanawa that I wrote and offered last night was recognizing that sometimes we have to be ready to learn. And it's hard to get ready to learn when we have a lot of mamai around the reo. And we have a lot of loss. And it manifests in ways like literally stopping in your throat. And so I just wanted to say something to affirm that we open our ears and our hearts and our mouths to speak, to aki, you know, to bring us into that place, because it's not always easy. And then we go, why am I not learning very well? Because there's so much noise in our heads. And there's so much self-criticism, imagined criticism, actual criticism from our own, because we're good at that too. So that was that was what I offered last night, and I offered to anybody who finds that it would be useful.
And it was just the type of inspiration that I needed to read as I woke up this morning and saw my cousin Charmaine's post. Because with that, for many of you who are sitting in here, exactly what Stacey is talking about, I feel each and every morning when I go live on my radio show and I'm expected to speak in te reo. And I asked Timothy a question on Wednesday night out at Whakarewarewa. Why did he compose this particular waiata, and why did he use these particular words for our winning poi in 1996? Te tere hoki o te arero Māori ki te hahani. Heha, heha, he. And it had all of that because we're very quick to criticise our own. And with that criticism comes a mamai that sits so deep within. Everyone thinks I'm so confident. Oh, and she can kōrero, and she can do this, and she can do that. But the whakamā sits right up here, and it presses down. So even as confident as you are, Stace, was te reo your first language?
Oh, no. Not even my second language. My third, because I speak broken Japanese, but I was an exchange student. So I learnt Japanese when I was about 17 years old, and it was actually in that act that I wrote to my kui and I said, I understand what it's like to speak a language now, and I can speak someone else's and I can't speak my own. And I promised her, she was teaching at a polytech on the west coast, Te Taipōtini, at that point, and I promised her that when I came home I would learn our reo. And I did. It only just took about 10 years. But I guess, Mercy, what I want to say about, say, when you stand at kapahaka and you're so beautiful, and we're all just, watching this wairua Māori shining, and then we project onto you that therefore you must be a Māori speaker. And I always thought that. I always thought that kapahaka performers could speak Māori, and it took me a while to realise they couldn't necessarily. But to me, the beauty of kapahaka is it shows this release of who we are, he momo tonu. And in Te Arawa, we feel very proud about that. And it's there, it's in the flick of the hips. I see in my girl, it's not even though she has Ngāti teachers, she doesn't takahi like a Ngāti. It's Arawa all day. And my son, when I just see in them, and they don't know, but it makes you cry as a parent, because they're just getting to live their Māori lives and express their wairua Māori. So yeah, we do project onto you, and we go, nā whai anō, he wahine kōrero Māori, and our expectations of ourselves are very high. And we hold ourselves to high standards, and we want to, but it's just, what do we do in the meantime when we're not as perfect and as great as we wish to be? Are we going to sit at home until we're perfect and not speak Māori until we're perfect? Ka re taia. You just can't. So it's this humility and humbling and really challenging space to be in, of vulnerability.
And that's another kupu that has come across our different sessions over the week, is the vulnerability of our writers. And in that space of being vulnerable, you also find resilience, and you find inner power. And both as mama, who have really fought hard for our reo, being a Māori teacher in a kaupapa Māori setting, fighting for our reo, who then ends up sending her children to mainstream schools, or atu i ngā kura kaupapa Māori, to find their own feet in this world. Ngā ao erua was also a challenge for me, and I know that even for your tamariki too, ia ko rātou I te reo, ko tērā tō rātou reo tuatahi?
Oh yeah, ko te reo tuatahi. So sorry to answer your question. Neither Scotty or I grew up with te reo Māori as a language that we could speak right until he was 19 when he started to learn. And I was probably in my early 20s. So we were very short on vocab. They could, obviously, he could do kapahaka and stuff, but not much. And there's people here that I know have nurtured Scotty, and mihi ana au kia koutou katoa. I roto i ngā pū manawa, the kapahaka, all of those settings, it was actually Taini who said to him, come to kapahaka, that will help you with your reo. So that was one of the means that he had. But for me, I had a really messy path, just going to night class, and then I'd stop again. I'd go, I've missed 2 weeks, so I better not go ever again. I didn't get 100%, I think I'll do the beginner's course again, 4 times. And then I'd go to kurereo, and that is some sort of fear, where you're just trying to, it's like, oh my gosh, they are speaking to me, and I'm looking at their mouths, and I'm thinking about, they probably think I look really stupid, and now I haven't actually listened to anything they said, and so I have no chance of constructing a sentence. And then you get to the point where you go, oh man, I understood everything they said, but I didn't know to put it together like that. So all those stages of learning, it would have been nice to have a more elegant path, because I happened to be on TV at the time, and everyone could see my inadequacies and hear it. I was making basic reo mistakes in front of people who are on wakahuia and te karere, and I was trying to laugh at the right time in their jokes, and so you were drinking there at Waitangi, and they go, Paora Max, kaupapa, and I go, ha, ha, ha. I was just trying to, fit in. And then the one thing that accelerated my learning was going to immersion. So I went home to Ngaitahu ia marama every month. And it was only then that it kind of boosted up. Then I started going to kurereo. Then I was probably an intermediate speaker when Scotty and I got together. So I could stay in the reo maybe, 20% of the time fairly easily. But we decided that Māori would be the first language of our tamariki, and that is a return of the language, hei reo tuatahi as a first language. But it was quite naive because I didn't know how hard it was going to be. And I didn't know that I could potentially give up. I actually didn't even consider giving up, even though my kids did not sleep. They did not, I was still working. It was really hard, and it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I thought, oh, I could have just given up. I could have just stopped. But we're quite determined, and it was actually too much of a vision to let go. And I've just seen how much easier it is for tamariki to, if they already have the reo. And then I say to my kids, the important thing is for them to understand that privilege, really. Kau warawe whakaiti e tahi atu, kare anō kia whai ariro Māori. It's not okay for your life situation to make you whakahihi, because not all of our people are in that situation. But it's like an experiment as we go. And I remember my kōtiro, Kurawaka, she hadn't spoken at all, and I was really, really tired. I come home from mahi and I was feeding her, and I was not being the, onto it mama. I was just feeding her, and I did karakia kai, wana kore, with no vibes. And I was like, "Nau mai ngā hua papa haure warangi nui ki te kai, whitiki kia ora haimi e hui e." And she was like waiting for me. She hadn't spoken yet, and she went, "Taiki e." And those were her first words. And I got a tear in my eye, actually, even just thinking about it. But it just was one of those moments you think, it works. Like, I hadn't actually seen this in action, so to see it coming out in my tamariki was the first time. And I must admit, I think it's built respect between my husband and I, because he knows that it was a bit harder for me than for him. He's quite good at speaking Māori now, so...
He's okay, Te Mamaho.
But there were lots of, wakare nama te kōrero. But there was lots of language, lots of vocab he didn't know related to children. So we both had to learn in that way, but I had to really use this brain power that I did not have. You're so tired, and as I say, these kids did not sleep, that I couldn't figure out any language. But I was still, ka u tonu ki te kaupapa. And as much as people go, well, it's easy for you because you married, Papa Kupu. It's still hard yards. It's hard yards. And just use what we do know. So often, if we know something, we just have to use it. Kōrero tia. That's the most important thing, because otherwise it's like a latent muscle. Yeah.
And I suppose, just reflecting back as a parent myself, and then when i tupuake waku tamariki, they went on to Rotorua Intermediate. Hey, we tend to do the default. Oh, well, I'm going to send them to he kurauraki, kia ako hoki rātau i te reo Pākehā. Hey, this is forgetting that obviously all the Disney programs that I raised them in are all in Pākehā, well, not anymore. Everything they watch on TV, there was so much reo Pākehā around them that they were not missing out on that. But what they were missing was good reo construction. And usually, ko te reo o te kāinga, ko te reo tohu tohu. Right back in those days, it was ko te reo tohu tohu, but like the classroom, ko te reo tohu tohu, te reo e kawe ana i te kaupapa. But then you start forming conversations, and as they became young adults, which is what you'd be going through now, the conversations do deviate, and they do deviate away from compositions of our waiata mō tia that we're learning, or the poi that we're learning, into actually relative conversations about today. So as your children, I just kind of want to draw that story out a little bit more, because obviously you've got Hawaii is now at Kuratuarua.
Yeah. Actually, so I should speak to what you asked about was schooling. So what I'd like to say about schooling, it may be different in Rotorua, but in Auckland, it's still hard to get your tamariki in the kind of Reo Māori environment that you want. So Puna Reo was easy, thankfully. Then we went to the local school, because I realised I felt quite strongly that my kids should be able to walk to school. Like, isn't that a given right? Kao. So we went to the local school, and we said we'd help them. Julian Wilcox was there as well. We'd start a unit, and they didn't want to. So one thing they took from that is actually, if they're not on the kaupapa, they're not on the kaupapa. Kaue mau wā. Like, don't spend time on people who aren't on board. I would have loved to go to Kura Māori, but it was actually too far away. And so we're in an English medium. Tēnā koe. It's English medium, but also Reo Māori, Rumaki. That's what the primary school is. And then we started at Rumaki at intermediate level, and my name was Mud for a little while, hoi anō. It's that Morrison name, it just attracts it. Hoi anō.
Te te re hoki o te...
Yeah. No, we didn't have a pathway. So we have a Rumaki now, intermediate. My daughter is at Waiorea, just quietly national champions for kapahaka. And my son goes and throws my Christchurch raised self a complete curveball and asks to go to a private school. I'm like, that was triggering for me. Christchurch is very classist. My brother went to Christ College. That was a terrible decision for them. So I haven't told any of my kids where to go. They tell me at kura tuarua level. So that's where our son is. But he was, he paitana kōrero. Kei te piringia o kia whai whiako whānui. Kia whai ai ahau I te whānuitanga o tēnei mea te mātauranga. And when your son says that, even though he's probably making it up at the time, it's a pretty good call, because now I'm seeing he's focusing on rugby quite a lot. Hoi anō. But I listen, I have to listen hard to my tamariki, because I don't recognise their childhood. I don't recognise being reo speakers as a child, being strong in your culture, not searching for that. I don't recognise having a nuclear family, parents who are settled. There's no violence, there's no poverty. Therefore, I don't recognise their childhood. So therefore, I have to listen really hard. They tell us what their real life experience is. And then I get to talk about things like puberty in the reo, taiaki. And I have to be careful, I can't say too much that will be revealing for them, but for some reason, what I can say is that I remember when my tamariki said, Mama, how te kupu Pākehā mō tara? And I said, okay, I will just be very straight up. I said, vagina. They said, what is the English word for tara? And I said, vagina. And they went, ha taua kupu! Highlighter! I said, cow, it's not highlighter, it's... And I go, vagina! I said, cow, va. Okay, he pai ake ngā kupu Māori. And that's the thing, in te reo Māori, I just think it's hara I te karihika. It just feels different. And one thing I really appreciate is when my 14-year-old son says to me, he woke up in the morning and goes, Mama, anō nei kua pāmai tētahi āhuatanga ki au, ka re taku wairua I te tino tau. And he just felt like he was unsettled. There was something on a wairua level that didn't feel right. Ka noho mātou ki te karakia. And I just felt so grateful that a 14-year-old boy can express that. Because even if that was what some people might call depression, or whatever they give the words for it, at least he can articulate it. And kia au nei ko te reo Māori, te waka hei kawe wena mo whakaro, because the reo helps us speak to things about wairua so much more easily. And then my kōtiro, actually, we saw Casey and Karina and Kahara Mai Rau when they came to our whare, and they were listening, and she said, I followed everything until your daughter just went off and started talking about getting the channels on Netflix, and then it was too fast and teenagey, and I couldn't follow it. But I love that. I love hearing even the interface between English and Māori. And then I wonder what it's like for people. I realise it must be hard if your kids are at kura and you can't help them with their homework, reo Māori. So one thing I'd say is that parents who send their kids to kura kaupapa or kura reo Māori, please don't think that that means that your time's up and that you'll never have the reo for yourself and that you're just the parent who will never speak Māori. It's never too late and it's never not worth it.
So just on that, I do want to give a shout out actually, because we've got a few mahita kaiako I roto I tēnei huinga I tēnei rā. So kia koutou, kia kahara koutou. I know that for my kids going through Rotorua Boys High School and Rotāwhiri, those anchors the rocks that they had at their particular schools that helped them flourish, and whether it had been through kapahaka, ko te mea nui ki konei ki ngā kura i Rotorua, ara ko tērā ko te ahurea o tō tātou nei taiao. Ko te ahurei o ngai tātou a Māori mā. Era mea ka puāwai anō hoki i roto i ngā kura, ko te tikanga, ka puāwai ki wainga i ngā kura katoa. So I was just expressing that it has been a vision of ours for a very long time that all of our schools here in Rotorua embrace our cultural landscape, they embrace our cultural heritage, and they embrace who we are as mana whenua, because through that our children will grow knowing who they are and where they come from. And that's all of our children, not just our children that are Māori, that's all of our children. That strong sense of belonging helps grow their own inner worth and their own self-belonging. So the segue from school to writing.
Well, for me? Yeah.
Yes, for you. I'm not a writer.
Well, no, actually you are, because you write scripts and all of us are writers. Everyone has a story, and what I'd say is that some of us feel, don't express it, but we're actually all writers. Facebook will prove that. Some of us are better than others. But I guess I've always loved writing, but to tell you the truth, so there is a slide that has more books on it. The reason that we started writing, yeah, that's one. Haere tonu, sorry, could you keep going? Just till you find lots, there she is. Till you find lots of books, that one. The reason we started writing was because Scotty was first of all asked to write to refresh and write a Reo Māori phrase book. And so he did that, and we thought, oh, that'll be cute. That'll be like, bucket list. We can say, remember that time you wrote a book and then no one bought it? But actually, then once he wrote Māori Made Easy, oh, there we go. The timing was right. So that's about 12 years ago now. So that was just before, I guess, this wave of people wanting to learn te reo Māori. And actually what he wanted to do more than anything was to emphasize to people that this is 30 minutes a day. So if you do a little bit of reo every single day, that you will get better, and also that's the kind of mentality you need to bring to learning, not just once a week, once a month. Actually, it's like fitness, do a little bit, a lot, ka whai hua. And again, that was the thing, it's not actually empire building, it's just that we saw a need, that people need these sort of resources, and so that's why we made them, especially Māori at home. It's basically an up-and-go survival guide that we realise if it's hard for us with a fluent speaker and intermediate speaker, it's hard for everybody. So it's just the rerenga kōrero, ngā puna kupu, so the vocab and the sort of things that we need to say. So like things like using kei te unu taniwha koe to a tamariki, which means like you are poking the taniwha, you are asking for it, which is a whakatūpato, right? So to say things like, engari he Māori te whakaaro. So those kind of things to think about how we make the world of our tamariki reo Māori, engari whakaaro Māori. Because sometimes you find that our kids come home and they're saying weird things. Like you can hear they've translated the English whakaaro. I couldn't believe it the other day. One said the other day, oh, we're talking about a kiriata, and she goes, kei te tākoro ia e te kiri puaki. I said, tākoro? And her little sister goes, kei te whakaari ia. And I was like, yes, she corrected her sister because she's thinking of the word play. She plays that character. And she got big eyeballs, that one. Because I was like, come on now, mangere. Sometimes our kids are just like, oh, they're switching between languages, but they lean on Pākehā because that's what Netflix is in. I think it's got harder actually because there's such a wave of content in te reo Pākehā, and it is pretty, stunning. I can see that. But, me Māori tonu ngā whakaaro, te orokohanga o te reo. So I guess that's one of the things. But what I do notice is that how we roll with our tamariki, we speak Māori to them, and then we speak English to anybody around them who doesn't speak Māori. And ka tonu, kei te tonu ki tērā, and they're still doing that. But the writing process is interesting. Scotty does actually have a desk. He never uses it. He writes every book with his feet up on an ottoman and typing with 2 fingers. And it drives me crazy. But I don't, somehow that's how he does it. So all that fast typing he does on Te Karere at the end, it's all fake. He can't touch type. And he likes to have sound on, have the TV on, and he'll be typing away and just writing, blatting out these books. And it's like it's just inside his head. And so then we wrote Mauri at Home together, so we had to collaborate. So I like silence. I like sitting at a desk. And I had to be in the same room as this guy who's got the chase going on, and he's half watching League and then typing. And so that's just marriage, isn't it? So it's working to different environments, and we sort of set each other tasks and go, you do this part, you talk more about technology, I talk more about this. So that's how we kind of split it up. And then also when he was doing Māori Made Easy 1 and 2 especially, we just blocked out time that he could be free to do that. We had to. Those are just grafts. That's just hard yards, and you've just got to make, it's a commitment as a whānau. Yeah.
I loved how you actually spoke about Scotty and his big words and having to learn words that perhaps were more conducive to being at home and raising children. And even the play on, see, I would have gone to probably pure. Hey, you're just quickly trying to find a quick word and you go to a translate. So for the construct of our next generation coming through using the word tākaro, which is to play, whereas I would have used probably pure as a translate, to then go whakaata or whakatu, whakari. Yeah. So there we start having intergenerational transformation in our reo. Very cool, very exciting. So I've got a confession to make. I bought Māori Made Easy and Māori at Home only a year ago. Yes, and once again, that's my demons. Those are my own fears of speaking that have forced me into having another look at my reo and how can I improve myself. I've bought a whole series and packs of Anahahini's books. And I have Anahahini on my show every Thursday. And I am sitting there, I take my camera off and I just show him. And I'm like perspiring. Because I'm like going, oh my God, I hope he doesn't ask me a question. This isn't kurereo again, is it?
Engari, tō maia hoki. You know, can we just all have a moment for the fact she still does it? It's scary and it's hard and anaha's neat. You know, so that's the challenge. But then what else do? You step away from it and you start speaking English. And I sometimes see people on Te Karere, they're being interviewed and I say, hey, he kōrero Māori koe. Engari ka kore e maia ki te kōrero Māori. You know, like they can actually speak Māori, but they don't want to. And it's like, well, I've been in that place of pain where you look at yourself and go, oh my gosh. Well, it's just like every time you talk to Timothy, you then self-analyse afterwards, did I say e or did I say ki?
Did I add a passive ending when I should?
Yeah. But you've got to get in the arena. What is the alternative? You sit there and you speak English like you always have. So, engari e mihi anau ki tō maia. Don't think that because it's scary it means we shouldn't do it.
Tēnā koe, Stace.
Upoko pakaru te karawhiu.
Koira. Ka o kai te korokoro te parata iara.
Koia.
Heo anō.
Engari ka kore e torumi.
Heo anō, kei te hehe hoki ahau I koro I mua I te tainga mai ki tēnei atamira. We spoke about a part in the conference yesterday where that moment of reality for many of us who are at te korokoro, te parata, and sometimes we sit there at the precipice of this whirlpool going, I can either go that way or I can go that way when it comes to our reo and our way of being. Over the series that was held with M9 in Tāmaki, you spoke about one of the women who spoke about these challenges that we often have either put in front of us. Right. Earlier this week, we heard Becky Manawatu speak about the double-edged sword that many of our Māori writers face, because as a Māori writer, you're not only Māori and a writer, but you're also faced with the criticism of not only your own, but everyone. Te ao. If you're just a normal Pākehā writer may be quite different. And it's not me being racist, no, I'm not being that. It is just the difference that we have as Māori writers.
Yeah. Well, the weight of representation and awa whakamau ki te kōrero mui a koe whaia, because you know, so many of you know so well that everything you wrote, we were all desperate for, but it was Māori writing. You know, you defined it as you wrote it. And so that weight of representation weighs heavily on some people, other people, and I read your book about how you find ways around that, how you lighten that load. Because we should be at a place where we can just be purely creative. But because our language is in such a precarious state, because our people are not always thriving, then that's why we feel, and we literally are, asked to be representative. So just to acknowledge that that's a different layer that sits on Māori writers that doesn't sit on others. And then as Becky said, and then what is a Māori writer supposed to look like? What are they supposed to say? What are they allowed to speak to? So I think those are things that we have to work on. Because then, you know, are the movies that Taika Waititi makes, are they Māori? If it goes to a Marvel universe, well, at least one of his characters are. Like, I was like, why does that Korg guy, he walks like a bouncer at the Hillcrest, you know?
The old towers.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's Campbell, yeah. So, you know, that your Māori-ness, your Māori way of being will come through. I believe that. But I hope that we can get us to a state of maturity. And I admire people who feel and exact this freedom. So I was interviewing Tay Tibble, the poet, this week. And she said she's got 2 books out and everyone loves them. She's winning Ockhams and all of this. She's only 27. And she said, you know, I know I need to learn my reo. And I will. But there's something about writing about the colonizer in the colonizer's language that she thought was quite a good interplay, actually. It will show her growth when she can write in Māori. She said the statement of a native writing in the colonizer's language actually is a statement in itself. And that will change. But she just had this confidence that I will learn Māori, and it's different. And I think that reanga is different. Yes, we feel our mamai, but I just see them breaking shackles and putting, I don't know, a Gucci bag on it. It's just really fantastic. I find it really energizing, and I want you all to define what it looks like for you. Because say our plays of the 90s, our movies of the 90s, a lot of our books of the 90s were quite seated in our trauma. And it was relevant, and it was needed, and we needed it as a beacon. And we can write whatever we want as well. So, you know, you watch Vikings and we watch Scotty Love's Last Kingdom, and he goes, oh, that's just like rangitihi. Or that's just like, you know, like we have all of those kōrero. It's just, are we ready to put that into a wider environment yet? So, yeah, ko wena ngā pātai kei mui te aroaro. Kia au nei.
Now, I'd just like to see a show of hands, even if you're out there in the audience online. Ko wai o koito kei te ako I te reo. Who is on a learning of te reo journey right now? Yeah.
E kore e mutu.
Aye. And that was probably one of the things that my koro always used to say to me, you know, when I'd say, oh, but Papa, you're fluent. And my papa would say to me, no, I'm not. Ka ako hau, iara, iara. And another thing my Uncle Sonny, Uncle Lewis Moya, always used to say to me, when I was at varsity actually, was kia kaha ki te kōrero, ki te mutu I te kōrero, ka mutu te reo. Kia kaha ki te kōrero, ahakoa te hapa. Mā te hapa ka ako. Nō reira, kia kaha, kia kaha, kia kaha. So just congratulations to each and every one of you. And if you haven't started on your reo journey, this might well be the day. We've got some books down the back there. Stacey's right here, you can get her number.
But apparently it's been scientifically proven that you have to open the book for it to help you. So I know a lot of people say, oh, I've got Scotty's book, and I go, cool, have you read it yet? They go, I got a bit, but it does make you feel good when you buy the book.
Made me feel good.
Yeah, and it does. And in terms of the learning, a lot of you will have language that you already know, so it's just whether we're using it every day. I think that's one of the challenges as well. But also when you get to the point, I That's an interesting thing you said about fluency and telling your papa he was fluent, because I don't like that word. I think it's a really scary word, and it's often placed on us. And I wouldn't agree to it for a long time. A journalist would say, oh, you know, fluent speaking. I'm like, can you take that out, please? I don't know what that means. I know that I speak Maori at home, but yeah, I think it's a label. And matatau, yeah, I think it's sometimes dangerous. Also, the harder thing to define is what is a beginner, because some of you are sitting there for 6 years saying, oh no, I'm actually maybe an advanced beginner, but actually, what's an intermediate speaker? How are we going to measure this? Mena e kōrero Māori ana koe ia rā, he kōrero Māori. You know, you're a Māori speaker. It's just finding more environments and more ways and more kupu.
Tēnā koe, Stacey. Also, now just picking up on these particular books and how long did it take you, I suppose? I suppose it's something that's evolving all the time, because we might have people here who think, oh, they just whipped that up over the weekend when Scotty was multitasking and Stacey was sitting in her little barrow. But how long does it actually take you to get through the process of writing a book?
As long as the publisher tells you have. Usually you negotiate it, navigate it, then you're late, and then you say, sorry, just one more week. I seem to do a lot of writing between 10 at night and 1 in the morning. It's not ideal. But that's my life, and or early at 4 o'clock in the morning. I can't at the moment because of my job, but it takes months, basically, usually. Again, in the same way that Scotty acquired the reo, he's really annoying in how he writes. He writes really prolifically, and it's just like it's been sitting in there and he just has to download it. It's really annoying. But what you're doing is, what I've noticed is that you're thinking all the time. So even if I have to write, you know, I'm writing for Woman, I was writing a column the other day, and then my daughter did something. She touched my mako tooth earring, and that actually started me on another line. I just went blat, and I could write that out really fast because I had the idea, because I had the experience and something to wrap it around. So it depends. And then I know that some really experienced writers, I remember Witi Himaida saying to me, well, it's just discipline. You do it for, I write, I think he said from 9 till 5 every day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. So just, you know, lean into the fact that everyone has different ways of doing things, but a deadline is very helpful.
Ka pai, yes, very helpful. And I'm looking over there at Robin and the team. Yes, I know. So Stace, we might actually open it up for some questions. And we've got people also on our whānau online who might also have questions. And if anyone here have some questions for Stacey, not me, we'd gladly welcome them. Nō reira, te awai te tihi pātai. Who was tapped on the shoulder? I saw someone tapped on the shoulder. Wets, was it you?
What would Wetine have to ask me? Kia ora kei murira.
Kia ora rā, e mihi ana kia kōrua hoki nā mārei kura, e whakapua ki tēnei kaupapa mā tātou. Kei te whakatupu maua i a maua tamariki te reo Māori, hei reo tuatahi.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, engari kua toru nānei te māta amua, ko tāna hiahia kia kōrero maua kia maua anō i te reo Māori, kāre anō kia tino eke ki tēnā. So pēhea o kōrua, kōrero kia kōrua anō, I was thinking maybe you should write a book about how to have an argument in te reo Māori with your significant other.
And I just live with the team.
Yeah. Nā, he pai tērā kōrero tērā pātai hoki, e tuatahi mihi ana ki tō kōrua kaha. Ko te manako, te mea nui, a te ahuanei kai te tino whaihua kia koutou. Ka kōrero Māori māua kia māua i mua ngā tamariki ngā wā katoa. Ka kōrero Pākehā, māua kia māua. We always speak Māori to each other in front of the kids. And then if we're in the car, we might start speaking English to each other, but basically ka u ki te reo. But it was interesting. Hinu rewa pautu, I hope it's okay for me to share this. She really interested me in saying that her parents spoke English to each other. because those kids are beautifully fluent. And she said sometimes her mother spoke through the father to them if she didn't have the language, enough language. She'd say, well, your children really need to know that blah, blah, blah. But the tikanga, the rautaki and the strategy that we set up was always speak Māori in front of the kids to each other. And they know it would only be super stress if we go, kai hea te poka uru whenua, ka reo te mōhio, I don't know where you put it. That would be like a passport. That would be only, they basically just don't hear us speak English to each other. But I did text my husband in English the other day, and my daughter wrote back, and she's 9, tuatahi ko mai ana tēnei. First of all, this is mai ana. Tuarua, kōrero Māori. Speak Māori. Tuatoru, and then she answered my question. So yeah, I think, so that's not, hara te rautaki tēnei wā? Nā te aha? Like, did you sort of set up? Tika tai.
Tērā reo kei wanginui i a māua.
Ai.
Kia oi, kua ū ki te reo ki ngā tamariki māma, nāwari pāwari tērā, he tikanga. Kia oi, e hara i te reo parāwa mō māua anō. So he me whakawhiti pia i tērā whakaaro.
Mena ka taia, te
Tērā
ahona
hononga.
kai a koe te reo, kia pera, no reira taku kōrero kia kōruatahi, ka taia. Mena he kai parāwa tō kōrero atu ki ngā tamariki, ka taia te kōrero Māori hoki ki tō hoa. But you make a excuse me, a really good point about the language you meet in is usually what you will stay in. So it's natural for us to, because we met in English, although Scotty and I mostly did too, but we just had to change it in front of the tamariki. But it feels like a holiday when we speak English to each other in the car. We're like, ooh, we're having a date in the car. We're speaking English, ooh, YOLO. But Māori in front of the kids, because that's the koina te taiao, kōrero Māori. And I just realised, even my son had a traumatic thing happen recently. He rang me and he was actually screaming. It was a terrible situation. Some of his friends ended up in hospital. Engari, u tonu ki te reo. And I'm like, this is really bad that at this horrific time I'm thinking, wow, he still speaks Māori. And they're okay now. But yeah, this is when we say reo u kai pō. This is the language of your origin and your mother tongue. It's called your mother tongue because usually it's from your mother. But also with u kai pō, it's your origin, tō whenua u kai pō. So I do think if you can do that, it's just a flip. And I've flipped, like Mercy and I probably met in English but speak Māori to each other now. Mātai Smith and I, you know, there's quite a few that we've managed to flip. But that's because I get quite stubborn. And I don't want to be stereotyped as the one who can't speak Māori, so I just stuck to it. Ka kōrero Māori tonu, and then they speak English to you, and you're like, bummed out. But me tohe tonu, tohea te tohe. Like, don't let anyone decide for you what sort of speaker you are. Ne?
Ko tāku anō hoki, I te pērā māua ko te pāpō tamariki. We were together till our youngest child was 2. We met in Samoa, and it was te reo waiata reo Māori, te hononga. So in that, his aspiration's been an artist, and this is the first time I've spoken about it publicly, so I'm going to talk about 2 things. My relationship with the father of my children, and then another relationship that caused me to u ki te reo Pākehā anake. So ko te reo Māori I kawea māua ko Rich, ia rā I te wā, tainoa atu ki te wā I wehe. So we spoke Māori to our children right through till we separated. My youngest child was 2. He maintained te reo, because we separated, he maintained te reo, as did I for probably another 4 or 5 years. So the youngest by that stage was probably about 8. And I entered another relationship, and this is very raw, very real. And in that relationship, aha kua he Māori te tangata, for 8 years, it was considered rude to speak Māori in my own home. So we wehe haere te reo. And these are things like when we talk about u kai pō, I'd have to speak in reo to my children on the sly. Kia kore au e patu I te whakamā. But these are all of these oppressing things that sometimes happen to us. Aha koe he wahine, aha koe he tāne. So we have to be mindful of the space we create for our children. The great thing was that the children came home, or Tamariki came home every second week. So in that I relished my times to be able to speak to them. But it was an interesting journey, because in that time I lost a lot of myself. And yet, to everyone probably in this room, they still saw me as being Merce. Oh, ka kahana ia ki te kōrero, ka ahara nei, ka haere ki te kapaha, ka hara nei. But it was actually going back on the radio, or going onto the radio for the very first time, May 2019, that I found that I could find myself again.
Tēnā koe. Me taku hari koa ki tēnā. Kare te pai te ramo mo tāmitanga. But it's important that we speak to that. So I guess I should say that you're in an optimum situation, that you're speaking Māori to the tamariki all the time. But one parent can achieve it, just if there's one parent that can carry the reo, the tamariki will still become fluent. That's what we've seen. It's just if both of you have the capacity to do that, then it's sort of like a little bit more would be fantastic. But then, you know, the dynamics of relationships in the reo are something we could talk about for an hour. But I admit that, you know, the respect that Scotty has for me and probably is related to the effort he can see I put in. But he wanted it too. So, and I realise that's a privilege. I always recognise that privilege. And if you're not in that situation and you have a relationship that's dragging you down, how do you expect yourself to be able to learn very well? You know, like we're not all, it's not even. Not everyone has the headspace, not everyone has the access, not everybody has the support, the tautoko. So I think it's important we acknowledge that. And I have no problem. I actually want to say I realise that I'm fortunate, and I check that privilege.
With the here to pātai, do we have any online or anyone else here have a pātai in our audience?
Also, just quickly add that someone I know, they said that they found it really hard for their relationship because one spoke Māori and she felt like it was impacting their relationship, that she was sticking to Māori all the time, but devastated that she might not be able to do that. But she said, but actually if I don't have an awesome relationship, then the kids aren't having an awesome experience. So if we can look at a positive, beautiful experience in association with the reo for our tamariki, that's achieving something. So don't minimise what you are achieving. And I also think, you know, like I grew up, I thought my auntie could speak Māori, but she actually just said kawe pēna all the time. I'm like, wow. Yeah, just mean. And so then my association with Māori, hoi hoi, that was all I heard. And it's not a very good association. So mena he reo aroha, he reo poi poi, te reo ukaipo. You know, even if you're just going, oh, we've had a terrible day, let's do a karakia at night. And that's a karakia that we offered to go to sleep. Aio ana te rangi, aio ana te whenua, aio ana te ao katoa, aio ana te moe a te whānau, I roto I te mai, te matihere me te Mauri ori e, kia au te moe. Let's forget about what a little shit you've been all day. You know? Wena momo kōrero.
Kia ora, Stace. Hey, kei te kimia haere ahau, mena kei reira tetehia tu pātai. So just scanning the room and scanning online to see if we've got any other questions. Tēnā koe, anei. Kia ora, Chloe.
Kia ora, Stacey. Thank you so much for all the energy that you've put into Te Reo Māori. I know you're probably the busiest person I've ever met in my life, so I really want to mihi to that. It's been really interesting being in Rotorua for, you know, just almost 24 hours now, and seeing the way being in a more Māori environment, being closer to Te Ao Māori, seeing more Māori people has allowed me to feel safer in using the reo. Just being at the playground this morning with my mahanga, and everything is translated throughout the playground, how do we create safer environments throughout Aotearoa for us to be able to use Māori, because it's been really special being able to feel much safer here in Rotorua to do that.
Yeah, kia ora, tēnā koe hoa. Well, the mahi that you do in media and visibility. Visibility is really important for the reo, but that's not necessarily for Māori. So I guess we have to understand that we are achieving different things for different people. So visibility is important for the environment of the reo, but then we also need to look at how do we look after who gets access to learning the reo. How do we, I guess, make sure that in the media, when you hear the reo, that's actually about visibility and maybe normalisation. It's not so much about acquisition of the reo or learning the reo. So just understanding that it's multi-pronged, and more non-Māori learning Māori, I guess if they can see that they have a role as homie, as allies, but don't need to take it over. You know, so what it's doing is building a better environment for te reo Māori and acceptance. So we need to be visible, we need to be, also have our spaces for people who are matatau. Like, we call it te ao Māori because it literally is a different world a lot of the time. And I know we're in our hui, whakapapa, and all of the hui wānanga that we have here, people don't even know that still happens. So we need to have our sacred spaces, and we need to have our learning spaces and our visible spaces. Ine me mahi tahi ngā mea katoa. I think need to work all together. And sometimes it's going to have to be legislation. We're going to have to make them do things like Aotearoa histories, just so that it's not a battle, because we don't want our tamariki to have to battle for everything, but they need to understand and value the fight, those who have fought for it. Yeah?
I think one of the other things too that we've really tried hard to work on here in Rotorua is our Rotorua Reo strategy. And what does that look like? My aspiration is I walk into any shop here, I walk into any business here, and you're greeted with a kia ora. It's as simple as that. But how do we start embedding that in our daily practices? And how do we start encouraging that? Because it's as Stacey said, I actually went to mihi to somebody and I said, oh, good morning. Oh my goodness gracious me. They came back with a tēnā koe. And I thought, because they clearly knew who I was, and I thought, why on earth did I say that? But transferring our norm into our Māori norm, being Māori about who we are and where we are and how we fit in society.
And not apologising for it.
And not apologising for it is going to be our norm. That should be the norm. Kia ora should be something that just rolls off someone's tongue. Tēnā koe, those basic things. Have we got, we've got another question over here. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe.
Kia ora.
Is this working? Yeah.
Quite close, I think.
He uri ahau no Ngāti Whātua, no ngā puhi, ko tāta ki kai hu, te marae, ko hao mā ka tuku ingoa. Kia ora, Stacey. I've been learning te reo for quite a few years, but I would probably still consider myself to be an intermediate beginner, maybe. But what I've seen during that time is a lot of Māori come and go to our classes, particularly older Māori, who will come to the class and see that Pākehā in that class are doing quite well, and they feel quite stink about it. And those Pākehā will get up and do waiata and motiatia, and those beautiful kui or older tāne who want to learn feel really stink about it and they don't come back. So what can we do about that for those tauira?
I guess what I was sort of leaning into with when I was replying to Simon is I do think we should have wānanga Māori. Yeah, just spaces for Māori to be Māori. Yeah, and then you don't have to translate yourself and your experience. I know, yeah, it is really hard because the education system is Pākehā. And so therefore, writing and engaging with it is easier for people who have had a good experience because everything was, designed for Pākehā learning. So, but I have seen as I say, good homie who realise that it's a space not to overtake, but to sometimes observe. But there's nothing like being in our whare and being with other Māori and learning Māori. So I think as much as we can do that. And also Te Atarangi, I want to give them a big shout out because I feel like they don't get enough love. But if you can learn in an immersion environment, kare tū atu. It's the best. It's just that not a lot of us are that pakaria, that sort of resilient to be able to do it. So those kind of whare wānanga, I think. But then also I think the kaiako has to say, observe what's happening and acknowledge it and let everyone know it is actually harder for Māori to learn te reo Māori, just as a fact. I learnt Japanese and I was like, ta-ta-ra-ta-ra, kare nihongo wa karemasen. Like it didn't hurt me so much. I was just like, I'm trying. And that is the experience of non-Māori. I'm trying, I'm doing my best. And also being honest about why you're doing it and do you feel a bit neat? Because the thing is if your grandmother was not beaten for speaking that language, you can't have the same relationship to it. Yeah, your grandparents have suffered something. So I called it gaslighting last night because it's like the language was, Māori language was diminished, was said to be inferior. People say, oh, it's easy. Oh, you don't need to learn that. It won't get you a job. And then when we get to the point that we yearn for the language and realize that that was all lies, we're gaslit because, oh, you can't speak Māori. We can't lean into that narrative. We do need to set up things for ourselves like te wānanga o Aotearoa. Yeah, kia Māori. Kia Māori te noho. Kia Māori te ako.
Tēnā koe, Stace. We've got time for one more question, and then I'll be calling on Rangitihi Kua.
Kei tika. Tēnā korua, ko Eileen tuku ingoa, kai te mihia hau ki a koutou, e maia ki te tū, ki te kōrero i toto i te reo Māori, he kaha tērā. Kua i tupu ake ahau i Ahitereiria, karakau taku reo, i patua e rātou taku pāpai i tau areanga ki te kōrero Māori. Nō reira, ko tāku nei, i hoki mai ai ki te kainga, me te wawata nui, kia whakaako, kia whāngai i aku tamariki i te ao Māori. He kaiako whare ko hunga ahau, nā tērā i ruku noa. Karakau taku reo, karakau taku māramatanga i te reo.
Tō kaha.
Ara, he aha tohia ko te ao Māori. Oh well, haere ki te kimi. I pērā hau, kua tupu aku tamariki tokotoru i roto i tēnei ao Māori. Engari, kei te whakaiau ki tō kōrero mo te wānanga Māori. Kia Māori noa te rongo. Kia Māori noa a tāringa, a wairua, nā te mea i tīmata au i te whare wānanga o Aotearoa, ki te ako. Ara, aua. Kāre au paku mārama. Juxtaposition tēnei.
Passive verb,
passive
what the hell?
verbs. Ara, ki te ako i tērā āhuatanga i te reo Māori, I'm like, kāre au te mārama i te reo Pākehā. Nō reira, ko mē tētahi o aku kaiako i taua wā, tērā pēr te kau mā aha tau i mua. Ko mē tētahi o aku kaiako ki te whakaako mai te reo, ara, he porohita tēnei, he tapa whāroa tērā tāpiri i te, I'm like, bro. Kāre au te paku mārama i te rongo au i te taumaha, ara, ko au noiho te tangata Māori i roto i tērā karaie, i whakamāhau. Nā te mea, ara, kei te kite ai taku reo, i taku oranga. Engari ki te ako pērā, kāre au te mārama. Nō reira, i wehe. I kōrero ai kia me, pahitas kōrero mai, kei te rongo. Kei te hihi au kia tuku i taku reo noiho. Aha koa te hapa, aha koa te aha, ka māma ake, taku māramatanga ki te ako i taku ake reo, i tēnei āhuatanga, te āhuatanga Māori, māku. So, wehe atu, kāre au whai wā ki te, whai atu i tētahi atu i rautaki. Okay, oh well, me hoki atu au. ki te whare wānanga. Hoki atu, pērā toru, tapa torus, tapa whās, porohitas, juxtapositions, phrases, nouns, verbs, aua. Yep, okay, kare koe ako Eileen, hoki atu, haere atu, ara I timata I taku tohu I te reo, I te mahi kai ako. So, I riroa hau taku tohu I te mainstream, me taku whakaro, okay, ka ako ai roto I tēnei, ao me taku tohu, engari nā aku tamariki tēnei e poi kia whai te reo Māori, te ara reo Māori. So, ai pai tērā, ruku atu ai, okay, kua pai iau, marama, kupu, e tahi o nā rerenga. Ka pai tērā, nin I piki te taumata o aku tamariki, ara I te toromia noa hau. Koera te take I ruku noa, fully immersion, I uaua. Engari nā taku mahi, me nā tamariki Māori, te reo tuatahi, I poi tēnei. Ka korero, hapa katoa, ka pēnei nā tamariki ki au. Engari, kāre he I tērā rongo whakamā, kāre rātou te paku marama I au, nō reira māku anō tēnei e whakatika. Engari, he rereke te rongo te taramaiti I te tangata Pākeke o te, tōhunga I te reo Māori mātanga, e rā ahuatanga. Nō reira, he tino wai Māori a hau I taku mahi me aku tamariki kia tū pēnei, kia tū maia. Ki te kōrero, ka kore au whakaro ki tētahi e whakawā I a hau, kua tau au. Aha kua te mataku. Ko aku tamariki noiho tēnei e whakawā I au. Nei, kua huri taku whakaro pērā. Engari, ko taku pātai me enei āhuatanga.
Oh, he pātai, okay.
He pātai, koera te taku ko tū. He ua e rā akoranga me te verbs, nouns, pēnei, and then ka pērā, like, kāre, I noia nei, kei te marama hau, kei te marama hau te reo Māori, noia nei, engari, I ua e rā āhua I rā tuhinga māku I roto ki te ako I te reo. Koira te take, like, ka pēhea tātou te whakatūwhera I enei wānanga Māori, a tāringa, a ngākau. Kia Māori noa tēnei āhuatanga pērā I tēnei tangatai konei. Katahi anō ia ka taumai ki Rotorua, ka rongo ia I te rerekētanga o tēnei orohe, me te reo rua, me te reo Māori, me te ao Māori. Ka pēhea tātou te whakawhānuitia I te motu ai.
O me timata ki te kāinga.
Yeah, timata ki te kāinga.
Kei te kawe e koutou, ne? Rangiti, kei te whakahaere wānanga koutou. Engari, ko te painga atu tērā, mena ka noho kei roto I te tai ao kōrero Māori kāre tū atu. Taku kaha tautoko I tērā. Ko te mahi matua o wēnei pukapuka, he whakawātea I etahi, me ki etahi Pākehā, kia ako I te reo, kia kore e whakakiki I ngā akoranga katoa. Kona tētahi o ngā take. Engari, kāre I tino aro ki ngā kupu, taitei pera I the verbs, nouns, blah, blah, blah. Engari, I aro ke ki te waru, ki te rua te kau ōrau o ngā kupu ka whakamahia mo te wā waru te kau, mo te waru te kau ōrau o te wā. So 20% of words that you use for 80% of conversations. Kona te aronga, that's the rautaki for Scotty's books. Engari, he tika tau, if you can handle going into a reo environment like that, kōrero Māori ki ngā tamariki kāre tū atu. Koia te tauira. That's the way.
Nō reira, tēnā anō tātou katoa, ka few tēnā kau kia koe rangitihi, but before rangitihi does our karakia, tēnā rā tātou katoa, karawhiua mai ko te pakipaki kia Stacey I tēnei rangai.
Ka tika me mihi atu ki a koe Stacey. Mō I whakawāte hia, kia hara mai, kia hoki mai ki te wākainga, kia whakatakoto o whakaaro, e pāna ki ngā puka a tāhua whakātru he ake nei. At 5 minutes to 1, Mākoha Gardener will summon you to return to your seat. You can eat lunch at your seat, standing up looking at the McLeod's books or the Takarangi exhibition, or outside. There are 2 ends in terms of plates, and you're to help yourself. There's actually 3. Normal people will go to the normal food. I will go straight to the cakes. And just so you know, this karakia was whakawhakaia. It was taught to me when I was in a kapahaka. Auckland Anglican Maori Club, King Haka, and we sang it. And I've forgotten the tune, but I remember the words. Nā reira. Ki whakapai a tātou kai. Noho mai e te ariki. Kia kaitahi ai rā tātou, manakitia hoki mātou, me enei, e rā kai e horatu nei. Amene. Please help yourselves. Use your elbows to get to the food, you know.